Okay, so welcome everyone for actually the last session that I will myself be facilitating about the glossary, and we've been yeah, Hillary's also going to join us. We've been at it for, well, almost 2 months now, coming up for 2 months, and absolutely delighted that today Verlyn is going to join me. So the two of us are responsible for what's going to happen this afternoon, which is absolutely fabulous. And for people who, well, first of all, it would be great, George, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself. There's some new people in the room, so if you wouldn't mind, and then the two of us, Verla and myself, are going to introduce ourselves, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. Hello. For those who don't know me, I'm George. I see my name is PQRC again. I am the research assistant for this project and also doing my master's in psychology of education at the moment at the University of Cape Town.
So thank you very much. Verla, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, yes, yeah. Thank you, Karen. My name is Verlyne, and um, I'm a psychologist by training and was working for close to about 15 years as a psychologist back home in Canada before I returned to school to do my PhD. About a year and a half or so into my PhD, doing an interdisciplinary PhD, kind of combining psychology and arts and creativities. And yes, I volunteered to help Karen with today's session. It's a topic that is close to my heart, and in terms of my research, I'm looking at relationality. So I'm looking at how do we relate through our differences. So that's my area of interest. Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Yeah, absolutely delighted, and I think, especially as a psychologist and a topic, I think it couldn't be a better combination. And so I'm a professor of early childhood education at the University of Oulu, in the north of Finland. And I moved there after living and working for 12 years in South Africa. Um, and still miss it and come back as often as I can. But yeah, that kind of contrast has also been incredibly rich, for the research I do, and still do quite a bit of research in South Africa. But my heart is very much in child studies, post-humanist child studies, and early childhood education, but also philosophy of education. So see how it goes, because it might, if our group stays of this size, would actually be quite nice to also go through maybe some, if we work in especially breakout rooms, that we introduce ourselves to each other. But just to say, as always, for people, some of you have been here right from the start. We started with this glossary sessions, and so the format. But for people who haven't, the whole idea of it is this book that you can't see when I hold it up, the glossary, is one of the books in the post-qualitative, new materialist, and critical post-humanist, is that right? Research series. And thank you, which is part of the collective that George was already mentioning. And what we have is that the whole idea of the collective is that we create resources that help, support people in doing post-qualitative research, either in teaching or in researching, because in post-humanism also, teaching and researching, they are not separate practices. And what we're doing, and oh, do you mind, George, showing, I don't know whether it's like already visible, but what is so far up on the glossary, and then you have a little bit of an idea of how this works. So when you go to the glossary, is it already public or not quite yet? Not quite yet, but this is what George is working on. And as a lot of people in this room already know, they're incredibly amazing as the assistant to this. So when you look at the glossary, is already posting things that we have done before. So we've been having sessions on interaction, on diffraction, and these resources and working on the whiteboard are all already ready to go. This is the sessions, the kind of lesson plan that we have been working with. And we want to be completely transparent about that, you know. So when you work with the glossary in your own teaching, then how would a session work, you know? So Viv and Viv Bozelek and myself have been working at doing quite a few of the glossaries, I think probably most so far. And next week George will announce the next one at the end of this session. For now, we are going to start, and oh yeah, here you can see. So this is the kind of lesson plan, and that is what we have done together. And every week it looks like something different. And of course, they're completely untangled as well. So today we're going to look at, oh yeah, so just to say, for that purpose, we record. But if you prefer to be recorded without the visual, without your face, that's also possible. You can also choose to face us in a different way. And we can leave that up to you, how you might make that decision. And so let us know also if some of that bothers you. So what we're going to do is, if you could share what we're going to do today, George. I need to drink. Spring is in the air.
Is this what you were asking for?
Yes, please. So you can see here the kind of outline, what we're going to do. Fortunately, we've done one. And we're going to read out aloud together adult child. And we need volunteers to do that. And then we're going to discuss the text plenary. And Verlyne is going to lead that part where, well, Verlyne is going to talk to you about that when it gets to it. And the same with number 4. So there's a kind of key question about, you know, how do we actually work with this binary in our own practice? Then we're going to go back to, and we're going to do that in small groups first. Then we're going to go plenary. And then we're going to think with our hands. And I hope that you brought some art materials in the very broad sense with you. And it can also be from the outside in. It could be materials, it could be glue, it could be Play-Doh or anything else that you can lay hands on as you look around you. And then you can take a photo, and then George is going to help us how we're going to record that one. And then we're going to close, and we always try to finish. Well, we usually are quite good, and we finish at 1/2 past over the hour. So we've got about an hour and a quarter for this work left so far. So, like all our reading groups and sessions, we read out loud, and not able and disabled. That is number 2 in the glossary. So have we got a volunteer to start reading? We do slow reading. So at any time, if you just would like us to read it again a little bit, or a sentence, or haven't quite heard, just let us know. Any volunteers? So it's on page 4.
I don't mind reading.
Thank you.
So it is the adult child.
Should we bring it up on the screen for
Yeah, that's a good.
maybe?
Thank you.
Okay, this is by Karin Morris and Candice Cuby. What is a child? What is an adult? These might appear simple to answer. You might refer to the law, for example. A child becomes an adult at the age of 18, but what informs the law? What counts as a quote-unquote a child differs historically and geographically, and philosophically is deceivingly complex. So would another definition help? Attempts to define child use the adult human body against which to measure child, and child is found wanting. The etymology of infantia, infants, quote unquote, not speaking, implies an adultocentrism because it measures child against what she/he does not have compared with a fully adult human. A child is regarded as a human that cannot speak yet, or as well, at least, as an adult, and speech is used to measure intelligence. Child is defined by what she lacks through an absence or deficit of linguistic competence, brackets, illiteracy. Like post-structuralists, post-humanists resists the idea, central in objectivist epistemologies, that experiences and objects have inherent properties that can be captured by abstract definitions. Philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein already warned against using abstract concepts without the contextualization of everyday language and a quote-unquote form of life, a way of doing things. Language only has meaning because of humans' situated non-linguistic activities. Post-humanists also include the non-human and the material when investigating how concepts work. A doing of concepts and what is going on. They trouble the centrality of the human and how the adult-child power producing binary works to keep children at a distance and exclude them epistemologically, ethically, and politically. The adult by which the child is measured is an adult of a particular kind, not only of a particular age, in brackets mature, but also male, heterosexual, able-bodied, and white. Mutually exclusive gender identifications, you're either a boy or a girl, and not both at the same time, and patriarchal child rearing are typical in the West from ancient Greece to modernity. The child is of nature, a wild being, primitive and needing culture to be tamed, domesticated, normalized, and colonized. This process of quote unquote molding the individual quote unquote savage is like quote unquote undeveloped nations in need of development. Each child recapitulates the history of the species. The adult-child binary leaves child wanting and is deeply rooted in Western theories and philosophies with the culture-nature binary as its exclusionary mechanism. And there's what YouTube. Post-humanist research invites us to disrupt this speciesism and reconfigures knowledge-making as a process that does not already assume normative man-made binaries that include and exclude before research has even started. Post-humanists do not consider individual child bodies as the ontological starting point, but the child as phenomenon. Tracing the human and non-human relational networks that child is always already a part of helps to do justice to a world that is much more complex than can be captured through language alone. For this reason, post-humanist research adopts rhizomatic, non-representational, and transmodal arts-based pedagogies that include non-human bodies such as sound, clay, fabric, light, water, sand, paper, pen to break down adultocentrism. So shall
Thank you. Yeah, it's just such a I really love your voice, the way you were reading that. Maybe someone else can diffract through you. Because for people who are here for the first time, the second in italics is the diffraction. So Candace diffracted through my writing here. And I just love also the way she's sort of responding to what I'm writing there. So to highlight that, if someone else could read that bit. So who would like to be Candace?
I can read it.
Thank you.
Okay. Would another definition help? This question caught my, Candace's eye, and caused me to pause. How we define something matters, literally. It shapes what comes into mattering in the world. So what is it in how we define child as lacking in relation to adults that brings about relationalities to, with, for children? The etymology of infantia, not speaking, also caught my eye. I thought about my daughter. As an infant, she was so verbal, communicating through speech as an infant. I can't remember a time that she wasn't speaking. So even a word that attempts to measure the child as lacking adult speech is lacking or insufficient itself. Anyone who is around children, taught children, birthed children, knows that they are not speaking. Karin's writing on the child of nature and the child of culture provokes my thoughts as well. Often in teacher education classes, pre-service teachers discuss whether a lesson plan went well, whether they were able to stick to the plan or script, and if they were able to control or manage the children. But is it our job as teachers to control and manage children? Why would we? Why would we want to stick to a lesson script? Wouldn't we rather follow lines of inquiry in the moment? How did these notions of scripted lessons and controlling children become a discourse for successful or good teaching? Why would we want to tame children, domesticating the spontaneity, the wildness, the experimental, the playfulness? So, would another definition help? What might that be, and what might it produce?
Oh, thank you. Verlyne? Maybe, George, if you can put the page up at the bottom of page 4. There's
I have the questions in front of me. I can read them out too if that's easier, especially if we need to go back to the document for reading.
okay.
I thought, but yes, yeah, whichever is easiest. But I do have the document in front of me to ask the question, so I can refer to it. Good, yeah, thank you. Thank you for those who've read the document. I wanted to just start with a first question to reflect on as a group, and anybody is free to share any of these thoughts. There is a sentence, and this is why I wanted to kind of go back to the reading. The last paragraph, if you have it in front of you, the last paragraph of the first page, it starts with post-humanist research. So just go to the second sentence, which also starts with post-humanists. It says, post-humanists do not consider individual child bodies as the ontological starting point, but the child as phenomenon. Merce and Reynolds, 2018. And just kind of wanted to, start a bit of a discussion in terms of what does that mean to have a starting point as the child, as a phenomenon, and what that mean for various people. It could mean something different from for a teacher, for somebody who, for a teacher, for somebody who has an instructor, for a parent, but or even just personally, what does it mean to start from a point of the child as a phenomenon? So I'll leave it open, and any thoughts, we can kind of get started and see what comes up. And also I wanted to say, start at a starting point as a child as a phenomenon, but what is the starting point that we are at now? Where do we start now? And how would that be different if we started as a child as a phenomenon?
Would it be helpful to go into breakout rooms? What do you think? Yeah, I see some nodding.
Yes, yeah, we could do that. We could discuss that and come
I
back.
see smiles even now. So what would work? Threes or split it in half? What would work for you? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Three, maybe threes and fours?
Mm.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, do you agree?
Can you hear me? I
No,
feel like when I'm speaking,
no,
no one can hear me.
but I can hear you now.
Okay. I'm gonna make three rooms of 3
Yeah,
to 4 people.
excellent. Thanks.
Great.
And then what Verlyne and I are going to do is we're going to come and be a fly on the wall and a bit more. These
How,
conversations are always too exciting.
how many minutes?
What do you think?
Maybe do about 15, and then we'll have the other question, maybe another, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Welcome back. Oh, yeah. Oh, there you are now on the left. Verlyne,
Hi.
is it my turn? Oh, I don't know. No, I think you still, yeah.
Yes, yeah, there's still another part of the discussion to
Yeah.
that we can continue, but I thought maybe any of the groups, I think there were two or three groups. There's any main themes that kind of came up, feel free to share them, and we'll go back in with the second question. There's a good group, there's a good uh, thought that came up with one of the groups that I had joined, one of the first groups that I had joined. I yes, yeah, something was shared in terms of, I think we're talking about playrooms.
Sylvia, do you change your studio if adults are working in it
Okay.
Yes,
rather
yeah.
than children?
No, I mean that, yeah, thank you. We were talking about composing spaces, how spaces are composed for children and for adults. And so I was bringing the example of the studios. I have a small children's studio and then a larger adult studio, which is a very permeable space with children and adults. And they're actually no different. They're not composed any differently. They might have, burst into life in different ways, but I don't actually compose spaces differently or have different activities or have different approaches. It's the same. We're all humans together in the space with others, with materials, inventing and learning to create and improvise together. So to me, that's one of the qualities of the studio is just dismantling hierarchies of adult child, of we are in this together.
Maybe it's relevant then, Hillary, yeah, in the group with Hillary, then maybe you can pose your question about the difference.
Well, I'm just wondering if there's anything at all to be gained from distinctions.
You look puzzled, Charlotte.
Like, what do we lose if we don't have distinctions?
Well, this is where I come in with the enabling constraints, which I'm fairly confident I have said every week. So potentially I sound like a broken record. And in our group,
Oh,
we were talking about actually the enabling constraints enable, like we put them in place because they do something, they help with something. And whilst we were talking in the group, and colleagues, if you want to step in, I don't want to make you step in, but if you want to, feel free. But we were saying how there are some instances where you have to behave in a certain way that has certain expectations for a purpose. And I've spoken with other people in other weeks where we've said, for example, as an examiner, you have to uphold certain values, and whilst you don't necessarily like it, it would be unethical for you to behave in a post-human way, because that's not the assessment or the assignment that that colleague necessarily needs to go through. So if I was to impose perhaps some of those approaches. So if I was to do a diffractive reading of someone's feedback, for example, and that doesn't enable them to continue, then that's an unethical practice. That's something that I'm setting somebody up to fail. And I think in some instances, like the phenomena of child engaging with some of those concepts is really helpful in it. I love, Sylvia, you saying that the studio as a place is the studio. Like you don't have to change that. I imagine that there are some instances that you would, like maybe not a studio, but a learning environment might need different things depending on who it is that you're working with. And part of those considerations are age bound. That's where my confusion's coming from, Karin, because I hold on with my dying breath to enabling constraints.
Maybe you would like to come back to that, Sylvia?
Yeah, sure. I mean, of course, I see, childhood. I don't know totally, when that ends, but of course, I see childhood and children and the uniqueness of each individual singular child and the vulnerability of childhood in an adult world. I see all those kinds of things. But again, I mean, I'm also in a very, very fortunate position to play with things differently. I work very, very closely with a few teachers in the Children's Center. We're at a university. When the children are walking through the hallways, they're checking out the green machine, which is the vending machine. They've been studying that for years. And I hear their voices, and I'm teaching in a classroom and the door is open. They're welcome to come in, and children come in and they join whatever we're doing as participants. And I don't switch things because now children are here. It's like I have this this fortune of being in this place where I can have that kind of fluidity. That's not possible everywhere, or maybe it's not yet possible. But I love that sense where, when I had a visitor from Italy come, and in one of those classes, when children were there sitting around the tables with adults, drawing together and thinking about ideas together, and they came in and they said, I don't know, I can't make sense of this. I don't know who's in charge here. Who is the child? Who is the educator? And this has been nurtured, I would say, over 18 years. That's not it's small movements, small changes till we get to this place that I would love to be able to expand more and more and more and figure out, what does that actually mean? It's exactly your question, Charlotte. What does it mean then to be children and adults in the same space, thinking together? I think I always hold that as a question. I don't know that there's ever an answer, but it's something to work with, to play with.
I think and this is something else I've said is a struggle from the reading today, is I agree, Sylvia, I'm not sure when childhood ends, that there are, I think in my research, I very playful. Now, some people might look at that and call me childish, but they mean that with disdain. They don't mean that in a complimentary fashion. And I have a real pushback against creative academics are not less academics. And so I wonder sometimes if, going back to Hillary's question of what do we gain, what do we lose, if it was more a case of we research with people rather than researching with children or researching with adults, that we research with people, like the binary is the issue, and the connotations of the language, and quote George 2025, like language is entirely the issue because the language we have doesn't serve its purpose, and here we go again with some of those same problems. So I think maybe the bigger issue is what do we mean when we say child? If you call someone childish, is that a compliment? Because it should be. Similarly, if you call someone elderly, does that mean mature? Does it mean experienced? Like, what's the language behind the word? What's that I think feminist, post-human, that's the beauty of this philosophy, is it pushes back and goes, what exactly are you getting at when you use some of this language? What's weighted behind it? Yeah, Sylvia, I want to be in your studio.
Well, please come. You're welcome.
You don't need post-humanism to look at the weighting of words. You can use plain old critical literacy. You know, that doesn't really get me very far. I'm just trying to work out where, you know, adults are less likely to stick their hands into plug holes, electric plug holes, than children are. And somehow you have to make sure that when you're working with children, they don't stick their fingers into plug holes. You need to have a different kind of vigilance in your studio, Sylvia, I would imagine. Or you have to have child-proofed it, whatever that means. You know, it has to be a safe environment for children where they're not going to hurt themselves.
But do we need to adult proof something, just to come back at that? Because I think a lot of what post-human does is push back at those predetermined ideas. So I've run a number of sessions with professionals where they will not engage with some of the artistic materials on the table. Whereas if I had children in the room, they'd be knee deep in Play-Doh before I got chance to give any kind of instruction. So this is where the enabling constraint comes in for me. So the enabling constraint to protect the child from putting their fingers in a plug socket is as important as asking colleagues who are level 8 learners or level 7 learners or industry experts to just park their assumptions at the door, just their prejudice, leave it over there. Come in with an open mind. You never have to ask a child to do that. So the enabling constraint is different, but there still needs to be the enabling constraint. That's where I see it.
I want to just add something from a psychoanalytic perspective, where we are always children and we have never stopped being children, and we are you know, the child is with us when we are tired and we want to go to sleep, or when we're hungry. And when I do work in movement as a dancer, working with adults and helping them to move with each other and touching each other, I have the same problem, Charlotte, by the way, that people are terrified because there are all those kind of constraints that has been imposed. But now it's like an undoing of those constraints, so that, and I don't even want to say a childlike touching could come forth, but an adult way of touching could actually emerge, which is, from an epistemological point of view, massively a non-abstract but experiential, and therefore bringing in a very different understanding of what it means to be an adult moving with the child in yourself. And it is not childish, but absolutely neurologically readjusting and realigning so that you are actually feeling a lot more sane at the end of the session. So I will go along with what Hilary is saying. You know, I'm not sure that I gain anything by putting a constraint on adults, because I assume, in the way in which I teach, that they will actually just work in such a way where they can let go, experience their own bodies and others' bodies, and they are not indecent with each other, and they take care of their own bodies, and they develop hugely profound results for themselves. So in my work, certainly, I don't really think that the demarcation between an adult and a child in that context, in that studio, Sylvia, my studio is a phenomenological space as coming from the phenomenon that I am as an instructor, and how I make things happen there. And I also know that I've been in spaces where I try to demonstrate it, and then I land up on the floor and people get a huge fright. I mean, they think that there's something the matter with me. So we have big problems with this typical kind of a demarcation.
Let's have a listen to Beth as well. And thank you, Nobonki. That's very helpful.
I just want to trouble this binary. I don't think all children need to have us be very vigilant about electrical sockets. Some adults, you would need to be concerned about their proximity to sockets. So you can work around child participation, going back to 2000 UN Convention. They put together a framework of conditions and enabling conditions, and one of them is to assume competency and watch how people engage, and as support is shown to be needed, to provide it, but to turn on head this incompetence and to assume competency until interactions show that some kind of support is needed, and then to provide that as gently as possible. If we stop talking in these binaries, or we dial them back, I think we dial back if we dial back the binary between child and adult, that throws into question the difference between play and work, between who cares and who needs to be cared for. And I just sense a real urgency that we need to do these things, because the way we've got it segmented now seems to be very unhelpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think that one of the big differences between child and adult, if we go with what Derrida says, is that the child has not yet been submitted to the logic of language and then sees the world in particular ways as constructed by its culture. And adults have already been schooled and made to see the world in particular ways and have their eyes kind of blinkered by the education that they've had, which is maybe why they don't like touching and they're not prepared to, they've lost the ability to play with materials or whatever. So that I think that what has happened to child as it progresses through, say, a schooling system produces particular kinds of adults that make them very different from child, which is why adult can learn a lot from child. But I think it's worth trying to think about how the distinctions also help us to think about things beyond the power binaries that are set up in those distinctions. I mean, what has happened to the adult through the course of its series of relations has changed it. And, we need to be able to think the adult as the educated adult as different from the not yet educated child in ways that maybe are not good for the adult. Do you know what I'm getting at? I mean, I'm not suggesting that the educated adult is better than the uneducated child, but adults change because of the relations that they've been through in interacting with their worlds.
I kind of agree with you, Hilary, and I definitely see your point that we change along with all the relations and everything. But what keeps on fascinating me in my research on children is that if I don't think through the binaries adult child, but just like persons or people instead, to my surprise, very young children could be very knowledgeable. They can teach me stuff, and I listen differently when I don't kind of position them as children. And that's fascinating. So for instance, my own son, who was like, he was definitely a baby at the time. He had no speech, like no verbal speech. He had lots of speech, of course. He made me do all kinds of things to support his needs. But when he saw his sister cry, he would crawl over and pat on her hand, and he immediately just showed empathy, which is something that, according to, I don't know, Piaget or someone, should come later. And of course, it's individual differences. It's not like my son is the best or anything, but I do think they have so many capacities that we don't see or hear simply because we position them as child. Yeah.
And to what extent those capacities, and you know, your example and Sylvia's example and other examples make me think of that how, you know, if we think beyond the bounded body, that the concepts that we bring to it, the assumptions, the materiality of the environment, whether there are or no sockets, whether it is a studio, brings things into existence and that are much more than just chronological bodies in space and time, right? So when we think about capacity, when we think about how we are affected by events, that is much more than bounded bodies that have particular competencies. And I think that, and of course, that is from the UN Convention of the Child and about children's rights, and rights are attached to people. But what would happen if, because the underpinning, you know, nature culture binary that sits there is that we think differently about how bodies, not just whether these bodies we call human, adults or children, but if we think differently about bodies themselves, with, you know, affect flowing through it, with being affected by the moon and its configurations and how it affects moods and etc., etc. Because then we'd more talking about a body as a phenomenon, right?
Interesting addition too. I see a couple of comments that we'll kind of go back to, but also there are many ways of presenting knowledge. And if it's not presented potentially in a way that we see as either well packaged or well articulated, we may not necessarily recognize it as knowledge. So we're talking about children. It could be, I don't know if some of you have heard of the podcast called the Telepathy Tapes, which is, I believe, children with autism and what can be learned. This neuroscientist is sharing what can be learned with children and also adults who are nonverbal because of autism, and being able to see there is knowledge there and there's something that is being shared, and it's quite amazing. I just started listening, so I don't want to go too far into that. However, how is knowledge shared? And if it's not shared in a way that is well articulated into you know, a research paper, maybe we may not think that it is we may not quite recognize it as knowledge. But at the same time, there is this whole, you know, yes, there is I do wonder about the whole concept of responsibility. Is it because we are responsible for a child or even a pet that they may not be able to share a certain amount of knowledge for us that we cannot access?
be a good idea to use the whiteboard now. What do you think?
Yes, yeah, I think we can put some thoughts on there and use a whiteboard. We're thinking perhaps to share any insights and or questions, perhaps something from any individual or group. Also, one question that had also come up is returning to the child as a phenomenon. What does that mean for each individual? And also, what does that mean in terms of your own practice? I think some of us have already kind of gone into that.
Mm.
How does it change the way we approach our work, the way we approach our interactions with yes, in our work and in our instructions or our writing? How do we see the world differently, if at all? So feel free to put in some insights or thoughts. A lot of them have already been shared, but if there's any thoughts or insights or big questions.
Sorry, can you remind me again, which colors for the insights and which for the questions?
So insights, we can do insight yellow for insights and question blue for yellow. Sorry, uh, insights for yellow for insights and blue for questions.
You can also just child and disrupt all that and do be wild and experiment and Wow.
So we can start looking at some of these questions and insights. Karin,
Mm.
yeah, is there anything that jumps out for
Yeah, I think the question is what's the difference between child as concept and child as phenomenon? And I think for me it also depends how you see a concept. So if you see a concept in a say in a Baradian way where concepts are also material and concepts are doings, then you can also say, well, what child does, it also links to where was it now? Oh, where did I just see this now? Just see what I can. Oops, no, that wasn't the idea. Um, it's about then the consequences about treatment, right? So it's not where is it gone? Where it was artificial. Ah, here it is. So just No, adult is an artificial boundary that suggests knowledge but is enacting ignorancing. That's fabulous, you know. So it's about, but I can't read the top of there now. Maybe if you can make it smart. Can I make it smaller? Or can I just zoom in? How does this work?
Yeah, there it is.
So child is an artificial boundary that suggests ignorance and is enacting knowledging. Adult is an artificial boundary that suggests knowledge, but is enacting. Oh yeah, okay. So that is adult in an okay. Enacting ignorancing and enacting knowledging. So it is, you know, how do these concepts work to do certain things in as a worlding practice, and for what kind of world do you want to go or do you not want to go? So in that sense, it is much more than an individual body, but because it creates worlds and relations that are otherwise not possible. Yeah, and then there are some comments and a need for definitions. Yeah, and definitions can be very Cartesian definitions, right? Which are about the essences of bodies. But when we move away from that, and how do these bodies work, and how in our, you know, as part of interacting with young children, what else is possible that otherwise wouldn't be possible? And that's what really struck me from what Sylvia was saying. I thought, you know, it's what is possible for those children, but also what's possible for the adults, you know, which was, of course, what the visitor pointed out, you know, like, wow, but what is it that it allows us as adults to do when we can be engaged in childing, either as research methodology or as pedagogy? Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
So if you want to think with your hand, either as you are doing this or as you are looking and engaging with it, yeah, please do so. So you might want to use some Play-Doh, or especially one that's nicely smells nicely, or plasticine, or you want to get some paper out and some pencils or paint, or you want to stick something up or throw something away, or please do think with your hands. We've got a bit of time left. In the meantime, people might also want to say something, or what they find striking, or making connections between what they see on the whiteboard.
Yeah, interesting comment also from Charlotte. Yellow for insights, blue for questions, and. Feel free to elaborate.
It's the endlessness. It's you never just, there's always and. It makes me think about this, and maybe it's a question, I'm not sure, but like you said, those bodies are not always human, and I'm wondering if we're talking about child and adult here in a far too human
Nice.
concept or conceptualizing. I'll own up, it was me that said the enacting knowledging and enacting ignorancing. It's these words that are often venomous, I think, when we use child and adult. That's problematic.
And Elizabeth is mentioning and/as. Interesting.
Yeah, I'm working a lot with the and as for teaching and learning, but then it's not really teaching and learning because it assumes that the teaching is done by the adults and the learning is done by the kids. So anyway, I'm really trying to figure out how to write that and lack of the language, right? So I've started using and as, because the and still wasn't, I'm not sure and as is any better, but anyway, I'm working with and, so teaching and as learning right now.
Thank you.
I love the comments in the chat about birth, giving birth.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Parenting program, mellow bumps that encourages start the interaction before birth. It's a lot of womb interaction. And what it here, whilst in the womb, the moment my eldest talked, my youngest would kick ferociously. So it's only after birth. And it reminds me of a philosopher called Christine Battersby. And she's just amazing. She has written, what is the book she's called? But it's, anyway, her ideas, this is not a post-humanist. I mean, it's a long time ago that as a feminist philosopher, one of the questions that she was asking, you know, when we look at individual identity and how it has been conceptualized in philosophy, is very much with the body, the male body as its example, because the female body can be one and more at the same time. And that profoundly influenced me. I thought that is just such a profound thought, because when we think of ontology, then, okay, you've got one thing and another thing and another thing, but there are female bodies that potentially can be more than one at the same time. And it's always terrified me, actually, being pregnant. I thought, you know, I am one and more. But so in terms of ontology, that is just so that the whole male body has been set as the example for Western ontology. It's quite a thought, eh?
Can I come in here? Just that's a lot, or to do, I guess, is it a diffraction to say that makes me think of a psychological work that's been done, which argues the unit of analysis should never be an individual. We should start with dyads, because the dyad is the originary state.
So what is a
What is a
dyad?
dyad?
It's two interacting, and it's from the feminist psychology, which you know, talks about the original relation. We don't exist as individuals. We exist in a dyad to begin with, and stay in dyadic relationships even when the umbilical cord no longer exists. So it's not, I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying what Karin was talking about made me think of this. What if we, you know, again, maybe like her, it made me shift how I, you know, one of the ways I began to think, oh, there's more than one way to think about this.
But also how the womb is already haunted by, God, what is in biology now? The cells of, you know, they're not oh, help me somebody.
Like epigen.
Huh?
Talking about two cells coming together and the division of cells.
Oh, it is that it's not that like that all the cells of your body are your own cells, so that your own, and I forgot the exact argument now, but that your own eggs already contain the cells of your grandmother and your great grandmother. That's in
Yeah.
Thing's book.
I've read that too. Blew my mind.
Yeah, so that it's not that, so yeah, there's already generations in your womb in terms of cell structure, you know, so one of the things when you look at a child as phenomenon is not only looking at it, you know, what we tend to do in education as in a social cultural way, but also as you know, the biology and how what the natural sciences and changing our scales, you know, not only at macro but also micro scale, having that encounter with the body. I'll find it.
So are we gonna add these things that we're making pictures of them to this whiteboard? Is that the idea?
Yeah.
So if people, as always, if anyone isn't sure how to add it, you're welcome to send it to me and I'll add it for you. Although my hands are a little bit dirty right now.
Mm-hmm.
We did something like this in lockdown. We did a support hour, and people made assemblages of the things in their homes that were supporting them, and then they were all added to a whiteboard, and then we kind of storied around them. It's reminding me. It's a very nice memory.
So what I was just saying, this was on M52. For people who know this book, Arts of Living on a Damaged Planet by Tsing and all. And I can put it up on the WhatsApp group if you like. Here, consider a phenomenon called microchimerism, which occurs when cells from a fetus pass through the placenta and take up residence in the mother's body and vice versa. Doctors and scientists have long thought that something transfers from babies to mothers, often with lasting effects on mothers' immune systems. However, they hypothesized that some kind of molecules were on the move. Very recently, biologists have learned that one feature that migrates are cells. The cells of the mother infiltrate across the placenta into the child, and the cells of the child infiltrate into the mother. Thus, each one of us is a chimera of sorts, our bodies containing cell lines of others. If you are a firstborn child, you will have a set of cells that come from your mother, including cells that she acquired from her own mother in the same way. And if you are a youngest child, not only will you receive your mother's cells, but you will also receive all of your sibling cells. Are thus not what we thought. Every I is also a we. And while the preceding example is highly illustrative, our bodies are not only, not even primarily, composed of cells from our close kin. Indeed, we are more microbe than human. Yeah, I'll send you this. And then there are two ways in which you can read this book. So one of them is this side up. So there's the M52, that's the monster side. And then you've got the ghost side, which is the other side. So if you can't find it, then you're in ghosts rather than in monsters.
And Karin, what is again the title of the book?
Arts of Living on a Damaged Planet. And it's Margaret McFall Negay. And the title of it is Noticing Microbial Worlds, the Postmodern Synthesis in Biology. Oh, wow.
Thank you. Oh, beautiful.
Mm. Gosh, did she just make this? Wow. Playful adult pig with beard, moustache, and red lipstick. Childish. Such an interesting distinction, isn't it? Childish and childlike, and we don't have adultish and adult-like.
I know we use the word mature for children who are adult-like.
Adulting, says Elizabeth. Okay. Well, I think time is up. Yeah, mature for children who are, oh, lots of comments here for children who are adult-like. Love this. adulting E-way. Mistress in the cellar is signs of the unself. Okay, thank you, Nabonke. Massa had to leave. Okay, thank you very much. And Candice will be with us next week. No. Next
No,
week we'll have
Cecilia.
Cecilia, and she will,
Mm.
and actually closely related to this topic. So she will be, yeah, making us think together about memory. And then Candice is going to be the last one finishing it off, and Viv and myself will also be there. The temporality work of last week, Beth, makes me think human beings joining us, just having a different set of conditions in which they're becoming. So much to learn from them and with them as they join the constellation. Yeah, absolutely. So thank you very much, Verlyn. That it was a joy to work together on this, and thank you all for coming. And a lot of you keep coming back, which is absolutely fabulous. And yeah, see you next week, and have a great day for some of you, evening, and yeah, and have a nice coffee for people who've just started the day as well. So
Thank
take care, everybody, and
Thank you.